Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about this challenge to try to keep in sight, to try to keep in view the big picture. And holding that versus what I call the shiny object syndrome. We're all drawn to that shiny object. It's bright. It's in our face. It really seeks our attention and, frankly, oftentimes deserves our attention. You don't have to look far. It's right in front of you. But for the leader needs to be able to not only understand and engage with that shiny object, but also to look around the corner and take that big picture into view. It is the big picture that oftentimes does not get its due. And so today's episode is about just that. Our call, are drawn to the shiny object, but our need as leaders to ensure that we continue to view and engage with the bigger picture. Let me start with a few big picture questions. Not the only ones, but certainly ones that we should have in view. We should be thinking about as leaders because it affects everything going forward. That's not hyperbole. Our world is going to be transformed. It's going to likely be transformed by artificial intelligence, AI. So here's a few big picture questions to think about going forward. Does China, the United States, Russia, or other countries have rare earth minerals necessary for AI in our AI world ahead of us? Who makes the superchips, the superconductors necessary for the world? Who has the technology? Who's able to do the ongoing science for developing faster, more efficient, more cost-effective, and certainly more energy-conservative superchips? Who does that? And let's go on to that issue of energy. Who's building energy centers for the future? These all seem like big questions, right? Questions that leaders must be aware, must be engaged. Why? Because workers, and our workplaces of tomorrow demand it. So where are we in the USA? Are we engaged in these big questions? More than talking about them, what are we doing? And what are others doing? These are big questions. Let's think of these big questions as a three-legged stool, my metaphor. Easy to envision, easy to imagine. Three-legged stool. One leg certainly would be the chips, semiconductors, in particular these super semiconductors. Second, rare earth minerals. Where are they? Who has them? What's our connection to them? And power, electricity, the massive amounts of power that are going to be necessary for this new AI world that we are all going to be a part of. So, if you're listening to your local news, you're reading your social media, however you're getting your information, do these questions predominate? No, they do not. So this really is the leadership lesson for this episode. Don't get lulled into just focusing on shiny objects. We have to keep that bigger, larger view in clear sight as well. So, taking it personally, when I look at the news that I've consumed these past weeks, I would have to say that Gaza and the government shutdown in the United States have taken most of the airtime. Both important issues, to be sure. And this we can't, let me be very clear, disregard. It is not to say, take your eyes off the shiny object. These are important objects. They can be critical objects in the here and now. They literally are in our face, in our front view. It's what leaders need to do in balancing the observation of shiny objects and their meaning to work and workers and our workplaces, but also to peek around that corner, to see that future and how a leader must be engaged in that view as well, whether it appears to be that shiny object today or not. And predominantly today it is not. Okay? As I've mentioned, right now I'm probably paying more attention to the shiny objects that are Gaza, to this 20-point plan, which concerns me greatly. And I need to be engaged and involved, because it's only item 1 that has gotten really any attention, and that is the release of hostages, which is fabulous. It's wonderful. But already there are glitches, right? We know, for instance, already Israel has threatened to reduce aid coming in by 50%. Hopefully that won't happen. We've already seen Hamas people doing executions in city streets. So laying down arms has not happened. Will these things get resolved affirmatively? We don't know. But certainly those are shiny objects. And keep in mind that while we focus on that, the other 19 points are critical. And what each side's actions and reactions are is hugely important. So I don't want to diminish looking at that shiny object. It is absolutely important. We could say the same thing about Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We could say the same thing about Sudan. Here in the United States, we could say we have armed, heavily armed, in full military gear, people going into U.S. cities, members of the military going into U.S. cities. Holy cow. Absolutely a shiny object. But in all of these things, the role of leaders is to have a full view, not just of that which is staring us in the face in these incredible views, but to that peek around the corner to take these big questions, these big issues into view as well, because those are the ones that are going to frame our future. Okay. Well, I talked about the three-legged stool. Let's look at that three-legged stool. First, I mentioned semiconductors, absolutely critical. We got that, right? Everyone understands that. Where do they come from? Who has them, right? Who makes them? Where's that science? Where's the ongoing science? Who's developing them? Let's look at that quickly. Most semiconductors are manufactured in Asia, particularly in Taiwan, which produces over 60% of the world's chips and more than 90% of the world's superchips, the most advanced ones, those necessary for the development of artificial intelligence. South Korea, obviously again in Asia, another major hub, especially for memory chips. China, though, like so many things, is building their own infrastructure for semiconductors. All right. Is the United States a player? Yes, absolutely, they are. They are a significant player. Facilities around the United States, work certainly being done. But notice predominantly in Asia. Okay. Let's talk about those rare earth minerals, the essential ingredients to making a superchip. The recipe, if you will, that is needed says you need these components. You need rare earth minerals. Again, the questions that I raised in the beginning. Who has them and where are they? Well, China holds the largest reserves globally and is the leading producer of rare earth elements. Its reserves are estimated at 44 million metric tons. Brazil, India, Russia, Vietnam, and Greenland also possess large reserves of rare earth minerals. The United States is not without some reserves themselves. They have a very large rare earth mine in Mountain Pass in California. That's the name of the mine, Mountain Pass. So we're not without having some, but we do not have the bulk. And again, China and other areas of the world have the bulk of the reserves. What about power? I think this is important. This may be key because, when we take this metaphor as a recipe, right? And we say, well, if I have the ingredients and I have this good cook, right? But I don't have an oven to bake it in. Well, that's a problem, right? The same thing here. This big picture is simply this. The third leg of this stool is power. To be able to create, in the end, electricity. And the capacity to do that. Well, there are 28, think about that, 28 nuclear reactors being constructed right now. Where are they being built? Where are they being constructed? In China. How many are being constructed in the United States right now? Being built? 0. So, big questions important for leaders, and the creation of massive amounts of power necessary literally to fuel the AI revolution is occurring in other places in the world, particularly in China, but is not occurring in the United States. Okay, so what are we doing in the United States? Well, we're going to give some land for data centers. Biden administration did that. What about the permitting process? The United States, one of our real problems is bureaucracy. Trump, he has an American AI action plan to streamline permitting. That's a good thing. What about the strategic grid? Well, we're working on that as well. So, are we investing? And the answer is yes, but. Investments are occurring in significant amounts by large players connected to artificial intelligence for their own use, for their own purposes. So what happens here in a democracy, and again, as a leadership matter, there is this tension, right, between democracy and capitalism. And one of the leaders' jobs is to understand that and balance that. Because monopolistic competition and oligopoly really are not good things. It's why in Russia they call them oligarchs, right? Oligopolists. So if the people with capital becomes more and more concentrated, it becomes more and more difficult for the people to share in the benefits of electricity generation. Now, see, that's one of those things that seems distant, out there, difficult to wrap your arms around. But let me tell you, folks, it's absolutely critical. Because if the concentration of wealth and the concentration of power, and by that I mean electrical power, falls to a handful of people, well, then the benefits to American workers becomes diminished. And so these big questions really require critical discussions to understand ownership and stakeholdership. Leadership core competencies, right? Are we team building, or are we oligopoly building? Because the nature of work and the nature of workers doing the work is going to be critical to producing chips, managing rare earth minerals, and engaging in the huge power generation necessary for the AI revolution. So, we need to, as leaders, think about these big pictures in addition to the shiny objects which confront us each and every day. Both are important. But to only look at the shiny objects, folks, the leader must do more than that. They absolutely need to engage in those, but also absolutely must engage in the larger view, as it will affect all workers. It will affect all workplaces. And so to engage in the discussion about how that occurs, so that the concentration of wealth, the concentration of political and economic power does not become worse than it currently is. We live in a democracy. We need to function as a democracy in a capitalistic economy. That is a real challenge for leaders, but one I wanted to talk about today because I think oftentimes these big questions don't get the attention they deserve because of, again, what I call the shiny object syndrome. We become focused on the shiny objects and do not attend to the big pictures. Okay. Something to think about, something important for leaders. I get the myopic view, absolutely, but you also have to have that larger visionary view. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in. Take care. We will talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.